On a crisp morning, the sea mist hovered over the endless expanse of water, cloaking the horizon in a mysterious gray. The Coast Guard vessel, Resolute, cut through the waves with its usual steady hum. Officer Ethan Cole, a seasoned Coast Guard officer, stood at the helm, watching the waves crash against the ship's hull. His eyes scanned the open water, his mind drifting between the monotonous rhythm of his job and the quiet peace that came with being out at sea. For him, the job was simple: patrol the coastline, ensure everything was safe, and report any unusual activity. There wasn't much excitement in this routine, but it was a peaceful life, one he'd come to appreciate after years of service. The crew was a tight-knit team, all accustomed to the calm waters and familiar territories they patrolled regularly. As the ship sailed along the coastline, the morning sun broke through the mist, casting a golden glow over the water. Ethan felt the warmth on his face and closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the tranquility. The hum of the engine, the gulls squawking overhead, and the salty breeze had become second nature to him. It was a perfect morning to be out on the water. That is, until something caught his eye. Through the ship's binoculars, he noticed a faint movement on a small, remote island off the coast. At first, it seemed like an optical illusion, perhaps a trick of the light or a shifting shadow. But then it happened again. The silhouette of something, or someone, shifted within the dense trees that covered the island. The island had always been a blank spot on the map, its jagged cliffs and treacherous waters making it difficult to access. It was rarely visited, let alone inhabited. The sight of movement on the island didn't sit right with Ethan. His instincts, honed over years of service, kicked in. Something was off. "Ethan, everything okay?" called out his captain, Karen Wright, from behind him. She had noticed his sudden stillness. Ethan lowered the binoculars, his brow furrowed. "I think I saw something on the island," he said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "It looked like movement, but it's impossible. That island is uninhabited. No one goes there." Captain Wright stepped up beside him, glancing toward the island. "Are you sure? It could be just wildlife or a trick of the light." Ethan hesitated, but the flicker of something unnatural on the island nagged at him. It didn't look like wildlife. "Something's wrong. I think we should investigate." Captain Wright nodded, her expression serious. "All right, let's head over there. But keep your wits about you, Ethan. That island is dangerous. The currents around it are tricky." The Resolute changed course, heading toward the remote island, its engines cutting through the water with an added urgency. As they drew closer, the island became more distinct. Jagged cliffs rose from the shore, towering above the water, and thick forests covered most of the land. Ethan could barely make out the details through the mist, but there was no mistaking that something, or someone, was there. The closer they got, the more Ethan's unease grew. The air was thick with tension, the stillness of the sea amplifying the silence around them. It was as if the entire island was holding its breath. No one on the crew spoke. Even the gulls seemed to be holding their calls, as if sensing something was wrong. "We should approach cautiously," Captain Wright said, breaking the silence. "Keep your eyes peeled. We don't know what we're dealing with here." Ethan nodded, scanning the island with renewed focus. The movement he had seen earlier had stopped, but his gut told him it wasn't over. Something was waiting. As the boat neared the shore, the island's eerie quiet was deafening. There were no signs of life, no animals, no birds in the trees. Just the sound of the boat's engine and the gentle lap of the waves against the hull. "Let's make landfall," Captain Wright instructed. She looked at Ethan and the other crew members. "Stay alert. We don't know what we'll find." The boat slowed as they neared a small cove at the base of the island. The crew disembarked quickly, tying the boat to a nearby rock. The dense forest ahead seemed to swallow the light, and the towering trees loomed like silent sentinels, blocking the view of whatever lay deeper into the island. Ethan led the way, his boots crunching on the gravel as he stepped onto the shore. The others followed closely behind, their movements synchronized as they formed a tight line. The dense vegetation obscured much of their view, but Ethan could feel his heart rate increase. There was something unnatural about the way the air seemed to hang in the stillness. The island was supposed to be uninhabited, a place for birds and occasional explorers who didn't stay long, but now it felt different, foreboding, as if it had secrets it was guarding. "Stay sharp," Captain Wright murmured, her voice low. "We don't know who, or what, might be here." As they ventured deeper into the island, Ethan's mind raced. The movement he had seen was still fresh in his mind. He could almost hear it, the rustling of branches, the snap of twigs underfoot. But there was no sound now, just the soft wind that rustled the leaves. Every footstep echoed in the silence, amplifying the tension that hung in the air. The team moved cautiously, checking their surroundings every few steps. Then, they found it. A small clearing in the trees, where they came upon what looked like a makeshift camp. A fire pit lay cold in the center, surrounded by scattered belongings, a jacket, a water bottle, and a partially eaten meal. But there was no sign of any person. No footprints in the dirt, no evidence of who had been there recently. Ethan's pulse quickened. "This wasn't here before," he muttered, kneeling down to examine the ground more closely. "This camp looks fresh." Captain Wright crouched beside him, her gaze sharp. "What does it mean?" Ethan stood up, scanning the trees around them. "It means someone's been here recently. And not just anyone. This camp looks like it was built for a purpose. Someone has been hiding out here." The team began to spread out, searching for any other clues that could explain who had been here. It didn't take long before they discovered something even more unsettling, a series of symbols scratched into the bark of a nearby tree. They weren't anything they recognized, some kind of code or language. Ethan ran his fingers over the markings, his mind racing. "We need to report this back," Captain Wright said, her voice tight with concern. "This is bigger than we thought." But as she turned to head back toward the shore, a sharp sound broke through the silence. A rustling from the trees. The sound was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer. Someone, or something, was out there. The crew froze, their eyes darting around, scanning the trees. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure what they were dealing with, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. "Who's out there?" Captain Wright called, her voice steady but with an edge of command. The rustling stopped, and for a moment, the island returned to its haunting silence. Then, from behind a cluster of bushes, a figure emerged. It was a woman, disheveled, covered in dirt and scratches, her clothes torn. She looked disoriented, her eyes wide with fear. The team instinctively took a step back, unsure of whether she was friend or foe. "Who are you?" Captain Wright asked, her tone calm but commanding. The woman didn't answer right away. She just stared at them, her breath shallow, as though she couldn't believe they were real. Then, in a voice that trembled, she spoke. "I'm Mia. Mia Donovan," she said. "I've been trying to escape." Ethan exchanged a glance with Captain Wright. The name sounded familiar, but it didn't quite register. He stepped forward cautiously, his instincts still on high alert. "Escape from what?" Mia's eyes flickered nervously toward the trees, as though expecting something, or someone, to jump out at her. They're watching. They can't know I'm here." Captain Wright raised an eyebrow. "Who's watching you?" Mia hesitated, looking over her shoulder again before lowering her voice to a whisper. "The people on this island. They're not who they seem. They've been hiding something big." Ethan's stomach dropped. They had stumbled upon something much darker than they had expected. The woman's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. This wasn't just a simple patrol anymore. Something had changed. The island wasn't empty, and whatever Mia was running from was much bigger than any of them could have imagined. The team gathered around her, trying to make sense of what was happening. But before they could ask more questions, a loud crash echoed from deeper in the forest, followed by a voice. "She's not supposed to be here." It shouted, a man's voice, distorted by panic. Mia's face paled. "They're coming. You need to leave. Now." Captain Wright's eyes narrowed. "No. We're not leaving until we figure this out. Stay sharp, everyone." The tension escalated, and as the forest around them seemed to close in, Ethan realized that this was only the beginning. Whatever was hidden on this island, whatever Mia was trying to escape from, was far more dangerous than they could have ever prepared for. The peaceful routine of his job had been shattered in an instant. They were no longer simply patrolling the coastline. They were stepping into something that could change everything. And they had no idea just how deep this rabbit hole went. The forest seemed to close in around them as the echo of the man's shout reverberated through the trees. Ethan's grip on his rifle tightened, his body tensing in anticipation. The air, which had been still just moments before, now felt heavy, thick with impending danger. Mia, the woman who had appeared out of nowhere, stood at the edge of the small clearing, her wide eyes darting nervously between the trees. Her breath came in shallow gasps, as though she were on the edge of collapse. She was clearly terrified, and yet, the urgency in her voice when she warned them to leave rang with an eerie sense of truth. "Who are they, Mia?" Captain Wright asked, her voice steady, but her gaze flicking toward the trees. "What's happening here?" Mia's eyes, wild with fear, darted between the team members as if she were searching for someone she knew would emerge from the shadows. She took a few steps backward, her voice barely a whisper. I can't explain it all, but they're not just people. They've been here for years, hiding in plain sight." She swallowed hard, the weight of whatever she was about to say pressing on her. "They control everything here. Everything." Captain Wright motioned for the team to take up a defensive position, her eyes scanning the trees. "Get ready," she said under her breath. "We might have company." Mia shook her head vehemently. "You don't understand. You're not safe here. They'll..." Before she could finish, a rustling sound broke through the tension-filled air, followed by the sharp crack of a twig snapping underfoot. The sound came from deeper in the woods, too close, too deliberate. The group of Coast Guard officers instantly turned toward the noise, their weapons raised in unison, faces set in grim determination. "Mia," Captain Wright said, her voice low but firm. "You need to tell us what's going on now. Who are these people, and why are they after you?" But Mia's gaze was fixed on something beyond them, her expression one of absolute terror. "It's too late," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "You've already crossed the line. You can't leave now. They'll make sure of it." At that moment, the rustling grew louder, and out of the dense underbrush, a figure emerged. A man, tall and rugged, his features hidden behind a mask of leaves and dirt, stepped forward into the clearing. His eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto the group. He carried no weapon, but his presence was enough to send a chill down Ethan's spine. His every movement was controlled, purposeful. The man stopped a few paces from the group, his gaze flicking from Ethan to Captain Wright, then back to Mia. A slow, dangerous smile curled on his lips. "I see you've brought some friends," he said, his voice a low growl. "How predictable." Mia stepped back, almost stumbling, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and recognition. "No," she whispered, almost to herself. "No, please. Don't." The man took another step forward, his eyes never leaving the group. "You should have stayed away," he said softly, his voice cold and unyielding. "Now, you've seen too much. Captain Wright's eyes narrowed as she instinctively stepped forward. "Who are you? What do you want with her?" The man's smile widened, but there was no humor in it. "I am someone you should have never crossed paths with." His voice grew more intense, more dangerous. "As for her," he nodded toward Mia, "she's seen the truth. She's learned what happens when you dig too deep." Mia let out a shaky breath, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to know. I didn't, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend everything was normal." The man's gaze turned to her, his expression hardening. "You should have kept your mouth shut, Mia. You've made a fatal mistake." Without warning, the air seemed to shift. The trees that had once seemed peaceful and untouched now felt menacing, their shadows long and foreboding. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to act. He shifted his stance, ready for anything. The other officers did the same, their eyes trained on the man who was quickly becoming the focal point of this bizarre and terrifying situation. "We don't know what's going on here," Captain Wright said, her voice cold and commanding. "But we're not leaving without answers." The man took a step closer, and the group instinctively took a defensive stance, closing ranks around Mia. His eyes flicked toward Mia, then back to Captain Wright. "You think you're here for answers," he said, his tone full of contempt. "But the answers you seek will cost you more than you're willing to pay. And once you know the truth, there's no going back. It's better if you just leave now, before it's too late." Mia's hands trembled as she clutched her arms around herself, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's right," she said. "I tried to run, I tried to escape, but I can't. None of us can." Ethan's mind raced. What was Mia talking about? Who were these people, and what could they possibly want with her? The man before them seemed like a walking enigma, an agent of something bigger and darker than they had first realized. But Mia, the woman they had come here to help, was equally a mystery. Why was she so terrified? What had she uncovered that had caused such a drastic turn in this peaceful patrol? "You think you're safe because you've come here," the man continued, his voice a snake's hiss. "But you've already stepped into something that's been hidden from the world for decades. No one escapes from here. No one." Captain Wright stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "You're not in control here. We're leaving with Mia, whether you like it or not." The man's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his gaze narrowing. "You think you're the first to try?" he said, his voice almost mocking. "You'll see. You'll learn just how wrong you are." Before anyone could react, the man's hand shot out, and in the blink of an eye, something gleamed in the corner of Ethan's vision. It was too fast, too sudden, for anyone to react. The man's hand had a small, metallic object clutched in his palm. A knife, shiny and sharp, glinted as he lunged forward, his movements fluid, dangerous. In the chaos that followed, everything seemed to happen at once. Captain Wright instinctively reached for her sidearm, while Ethan sprang forward, his hand gripping the rifle's stock. The man wasn't just a threat, he was a force, moving with the kind of speed that defied logic. Before they could even register his motion, he had closed the distance between them, his knife flashing in the sunlight as he slashed it toward Mia. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he raised his weapon. The shot rang out, echoing through the forest like thunder, but the man was already moving, too fast to be caught. Mia screamed, ducking out of the way just in time, her body twisting to avoid the blade. The man's attack had missed, but the danger was far from over. Captain Wright's voice cut through the air like a commandment. "Get back, now," she yelled. But it was too late. The man, his grin never faltering, had already disappeared into the trees, vanishing like a shadow. The team regrouped quickly, their weapons raised as they moved in the direction where the man had disappeared. But the dense forest was a labyrinth of thick undergrowth and towering trees. The man knew this place far too well. "Stay sharp," Captain Wright ordered, her voice hard. He's not gone. He's watching us. The team fanned out, searching for any sign of the man, but the forest remained still, the air thick with tension. Mia, still trembling, clutched her arms tighter around her body, as though trying to protect herself from something invisible. "What the hell is going on?" Ethan muttered, his voice barely audible. Mia's eyes locked onto his, filled with a sorrowful understanding. "You don't understand," she said, her voice shaky but firm. The man before them seemed like a walking enigma, an agent of something bigger and darker than they had first realized. But Mia, the woman they had come here to help, was equally a mystery. Why was she so terrified? What had she uncovered that had caused such a drastic turn in this peaceful patrol? "You think you're safe because you've come here," the man continued, his voice a snake's hiss. "But you've already stepped into something that's been hidden from the world for decades. No one escapes from here. No one." Captain Wright stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "You're not in control here. We're leaving with Mia, whether you like it or not." The man's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his gaze narrowing. "You think you're the first to try?" he said, his voice almost mocking. "You'll see. You'll learn just how wrong you are." Before anyone could react, the man's hand shot out, and in the blink of an eye, something gleamed in the corner of Ethan's vision. It was too fast, too sudden, for anyone to react. The man's hand had a small, metallic object clutched in his palm. A knife, shiny and sharp, glinted as he lunged forward, his movements fluid, dangerous. In the chaos that followed, everything seemed to happen at once. Captain Wright instinctively reached for her sidearm, while Ethan sprang forward, his hand gripping the rifle's stock. The man wasn't just a threat, he was a force, moving with the kind of speed that defied logic. Before they could even register his motion, he had closed the distance between them, his knife flashing in the sunlight as he slashed it toward Mia. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he raised his weapon. The shot rang out, echoing through the forest like thunder, but the man was already moving, too fast to be caught. Mia screamed, ducking out of the way just in time, her body twisting to avoid the blade. The man's attack had missed, but the danger was far from over. Captain Wright's voice cut through the air like a commandment. "Get back, now," she yelled. But it was too late. The man, his grin never faltering, had already disappeared into the trees, vanishing like a shadow. The team regrouped quickly, their weapons raised as they moved in the direction where the man had disappeared. But the dense forest was a labyrinth of thick undergrowth and towering trees. The man knew this place far too well. "Stay sharp," Captain Wright ordered, her voice hard. "He's not gone. He's watching us." The team fanned out, searching for any sign of the man, but the forest remained still, the air thick with tension. Mia, still trembling, clutched her arms tighter around her body, as though trying to protect herself from something invisible. "What the hell is going on?" Ethan muttered, his voice barely audible. Mia's eyes locked onto his, filled with a sorrowful understanding. "You don't understand," she said, her voice shaky but firm. The sound of the growl echoed through the dense forest, reverberating off the trees like a distant warning bell. Ethan's heart raced as he instinctively turned toward the source, scanning the shadowy underbrush. The growl was unlike any animal sound he'd ever heard, a deep, guttural rumble that seemed to come from something far larger and far more dangerous than any beast that called this island home. It was a sound that sent a chill down his spine, a primal warning that they were no longer just dealing with a group of rogue people, they were standing at the precipice of something much darker. Captain Wright motioned for everyone to spread out, her voice low but authoritative. "Stay alert. This is no longer just about Mia. Something else is out there, and we need to figure out what it is before it's too late." Ethan's hands shook slightly as he gripped his rifle. His training kicked in, and he instinctively moved into a crouch, scanning the terrain around him. The trees seemed to press in closer, the shadows growing deeper, as if the forest itself were closing in on them. The atmosphere had shifted from the tense silence of moments before to something far more oppressive, the air thick with the sense of something hidden and waiting, watching. Mia, who had been standing motionless, her body trembling with fear, suddenly gasped and dropped to her knees. Her eyes, wide and full of terror, stared into the forest as if she were seeing something no one else could. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They always come. They never leave." Ethan's gaze snapped to her, a surge of confusion and fear flooding his chest. "What are you talking about, Mia? Who's coming?" But she didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the trees, her entire body trembling as if she could sense something they couldn't. The only sound was the soft rustling of the leaves, the growl still lingering in the background like a haunting echo. Captain Wright stepped toward Mia, her hand outstretched in a calming gesture. "Mia, we need you to tell us what's happening. We can't help you if you don't tell us." Mia's head jerked up, her eyes suddenly filled with something wild, something frantic. "You don't understand," she gasped, her voice breaking. "You think this is just some island with a few crazy people? No. They've been here for generations. They've made this place their own, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep their secrets buried." Ethan's mind was racing as he tried to make sense of her words. Generations? Secrets buried? What kind of place were they dealing with here? Everything about this situation was turning darker by the second, and the sense of danger felt palpable, pressing in from all sides. "Who are they, Mia?" Captain Wright asked, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "Who are these people, and what do they want with you?" Mia swallowed hard, her eyes shifting nervously as if she were debating whether to share what she knew. "They're not like us," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "They look human, but they're different. They've been living here, hidden away, for years. And anyone who finds out about them, anyone who gets too close, they don't let them leave." Ethan's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you saying? These people, they're not human?" Mia shook her head, her voice low and filled with dread. "No, they're human, but not like us. They've been here so long, their minds are twisted. They've done things that aren't just immoral, but unnatural. They've made deals, sacrifices, all to keep their power, to stay hidden. And they'll do whatever it takes to protect that." The hairs on the back of Ethan's neck stood on end. There was a strange, eerie quality to her words, and despite the cold logic in his mind telling him to stay focused, part of him couldn't shake the sense that Mia was telling them the truth. That there was something out there in the forest, something ancient and dangerous, and it was watching them right now. Just as the tension seemed to reach its peak, the growl came again, louder this time, and much closer. The trees behind them rustled violently, as if something large was moving through them, crashing toward them with incredible speed. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline flooding his system as he gripped his rifle even tighter. "Get down!" Captain Wright shouted, pushing Mia to the ground as she moved into a defensive stance. "Stay low, stay quiet. Don't let them hear us." The team dropped into position, their weapons raised and eyes scanning every inch of the darkening forest. The growl had turned into something far more menacing, a sound of movement that was almost unnatural, like the earth itself was being disturbed by a force too powerful to understand. Ethan's mind raced. Who were these people Mia was talking about? What kind of power did they have? And why had they chosen to stay hidden for so long? The questions multiplied, but there was no time to answer them. The growl grew louder, closer still, until the very ground beneath their feet seemed to vibrate with the intensity of whatever was coming for them. And then, out of the darkness, it appeared. At first, it was just a shape in the shadows, a large, hulking figure that moved with an eerie grace through the trees. As it stepped into the clearing, the moonlight caught on its form, revealing a massive creature, its body built like a man but far larger, more muscular, and covered in thick, dark fur. Its face was twisted and animalistic, with eyes that glowed with an unnatural light, and its mouth was filled with rows of sharp, glistening teeth. The creature let out a low, guttural roar, and the ground seemed to shake beneath its feet. It was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, part man, part beast, and fully terrifying. "Everyone, take cover," Captain Wright ordered, her voice sharp with authority. The team scattered, diving into the underbrush for protection, weapons raised, ready to fire. But the creature didn't move toward them immediately. Instead, it turned its glowing eyes toward Mia, its lips curling into something resembling a grin. The air seemed to freeze, and for a moment, Ethan felt like time had stopped altogether. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a vice. Mia, still lying on the ground, let out a shaky breath and whispered something under her breath. "Please, don't let them take me. Please." The creature's eyes flicked toward Mia, and then, as if it had heard her plea, it took a step forward, its massive form moving with surprising speed. Ethan's hand tightened around his rifle, but Captain Wright motioned for him to hold his fire. They needed answers, and they needed to understand what was happening before they could make a move. "Mia," Captain Wright called, her voice calm but firm. "What's going on? What do they want with you?" Mia's eyes were wide with terror, her voice barely above a whisper as she spoke. They want me because I know too much. I've seen things they can't let anyone else know. And if they catch me, they'll make sure I never speak again. No one ever leaves this island. Not once they've been marked." "Marked?" Ethan echoed, his voice filled with disbelief. "What do you mean? What does that even mean?" But before Mia could answer, the creature moved again, its heavy steps shaking the ground beneath them. It wasn't just moving toward Mia, it was coming straight for them. The air crackled with tension as the team waited for the order. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the creature approach, its eyes never leaving Mia, its grin widening with each step it took. It was clear now, whatever Mia had uncovered, whatever secret the island was hiding, it had cost her more than she ever could have anticipated. And now, it was about to cost them all. The creature's roar cut through the air like a battle cry, and as it lunged forward, the team was forced into action. Ethan barely had time to react before the world erupted into chaos. The only thing he knew for certain now was that there was no turning back. The creature lunged forward with a terrifying speed, its claws swiping through the air like blades, creating a deep, guttural growl that shook the very ground beneath their feet. Ethan's mind raced as he pulled the trigger, the deafening sound of gunfire filling the air. The creature staggered back, momentarily stunned by the impact, but it didn't fall. Instead, it let out a roar that made the forest tremble, its eyes blazing with fury. "Everyone, fall back!" Captain Wright shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos as she fired again. She motioned for Mia to get up, but the young woman was frozen, her eyes wide with terror as she stared at the creature. "Mia, now! We need to move." But Mia couldn't move. She seemed to be locked in place, her body trembling uncontrollably. It was as if she was paralyzed by fear, unable to escape the overwhelming presence of the monster that had emerged from the depths of the island. The creature took another step forward, its claws scraping against the ground, and its growl grew deeper, more menacing. Ethan's heart raced as he glanced at Captain Wright, who was now behind cover, reloading her rifle with practiced precision. He knew they had to make a decision fast, there was no time to waste. They couldn't afford to let this creature get any closer, and they couldn't leave Mia behind. "Get her out of here!" Ethan yelled, his voice urgent. Captain Wright didn't hesitate. She motioned for two of the team members to advance toward Mia, while she and Ethan provided cover. The two men sprinted toward the girl, reaching her in seconds. They grabbed her, lifting her to her feet, but her body seemed to go limp in their arms. The sheer terror that gripped her was overwhelming, and it was clear that she was struggling to comprehend the situation. "Move, move!" Captain Wright ordered, her voice steady even as she fired another round at the creature, which was now charging at them. The beast dodged the bullets with unnatural agility, its body twisting and contorting in ways that defied the laws of nature. It was like nothing Ethan had ever seen before, part man, part monster, with the intelligence of a predator and the ferocity of a wild animal. As it closed the distance between them, Ethan realized with a sinking feeling that their weapons might not be enough to stop it. "Mia, we have to go now," one of the soldiers shouted, pulling her with all his strength. But Mia only shook her head, her eyes wide with a wild desperation. "No. It's too late. You can't stop them. They're already here. They've always been here." Ethan's mind raced as he glanced over his shoulder, trying to keep an eye on the creature while also ensuring that Mia was safe. The team was struggling to keep their footing, as the forest floor was uneven and treacherous, the trees closing in around them like a suffocating maze. They needed to get to the extraction point, there was no other option. But with the creature closing in on them, it was clear that time was running out. The creature snarled as it charged again, its powerful legs propelling it forward with a speed that was almost unnatural. It was upon them in seconds, its claws swiping through the air, narrowly missing the soldiers who were still trying to drag Mia away. One of them stumbled, losing his footing as the beast reached out, its clawed hand raking across his chest. The soldier cried out in pain, falling to the ground as blood poured from the deep gash that had torn through his uniform. His rifle was sent flying from his hands, and he scrambled to get back on his feet. But it was too late, the creature was already on him. Ethan's heart clenched as he saw the soldiers struggle. There was nothing he could do. They had to keep moving, had to get Mia to safety before more lives were lost. But the sight of his teammate being overpowered by the creature made every muscle in Ethan's body scream with helplessness. "Get him out of there!" Captain Wright shouted, her voice laced with panic. But the soldier didn't have time to react. The creature's claws dug into his flesh, lifting him off the ground with terrifying ease. It let out another deafening roar, and Ethan watched in horror as the soldier's body went limp, his eyes wide with terror, before being tossed aside like a ragdoll. The team froze, momentarily stunned by the brutality of the creature's attack. The sheer power and savagery of it was unlike anything they had ever encountered. And the fear that had gripped them all seemed to settle in, creeping through their veins like a poison, clouding their judgment and making it harder to think clearly. "Move!" Captain Wright shouted again, snapping them all out of their paralysis. "Get Mia to the chopper. Now!" The soldiers scrambled to their feet, pulling Mia with them as they fought to keep the creature at bay. Ethan followed close behind, his gun raised, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the creature's gaze on him, could sense its predatory instincts, and it terrified him. It was like they were the prey, and the monster was the hunter. And he wasn't sure they would escape alive. They were almost there, the extraction point was just ahead, a small clearing where their helicopter would land to pick them up. The trees thinned out as they pushed forward, their steps quick and desperate. But even as they made progress, the growls of the creature grew louder, closer. It wasn't going to stop. The team reached the clearing, but the helicopter wasn't there. The only thing waiting for them was the open sky and the distant sound of the waves crashing against the shore. Their extraction was late, much too late. "No!" Captain Wright spat, her voice full of fury and frustration. "Where the hell are they? They're supposed to be here." Ethan's mind was racing. Without the helicopter, they were trapped. There was no way they could hold off the creature on their own. And as the seconds ticked by, he could feel the weight of the decision he had to make. They couldn't afford to wait. They had to fight back. With a sense of finality, Captain Wright turned to face the team. "We're not waiting any longer. We fight until we're rescued, or we fight until we can't fight anymore. We hold this position, understood? The team nodded in unison, their faces grim with the realization of what they had to do. There was no turning back now. They were out of time. The creature appeared at the edge of the clearing, its hulking form emerging from the shadows like a nightmare come to life. Its eyes were glowing brighter now, and the air seemed to crackle with energy as it advanced, its massive claws dragging through the ground. "Prepare yourselves," Captain Wright yelled, signaling for the team to spread out. They would have to use the environment to their advantage, take cover behind the trees and rocks, and hope they could land a hit on the creature. Ethan raised his rifle, aiming at the creature's chest. He fired, the shot hitting its target, but it didn't even flinch. The creature let out a roar of rage and charged forward, its massive form a blur of motion as it swiped its claws through the air, sending soldiers flying with the sheer force of its attacks. The battle had begun. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he fought to keep his focus, to keep moving. The creature was relentless, its strength overwhelming. But they had no choice. They had to survive. For Mia. For each other. But in the back of his mind, a terrifying thought lingered: if they couldn't stop the creature, what would happen to the rest of the world when it was free? The battle raged on, every second feeling like a lifetime. The creature, with its unmatched ferocity, tore through the clearing, moving faster than Ethan had ever thought possible for such a hulking beast. Its claws sliced through the air like blades, and each time it struck, the sound was deafening, a sickening crunch of metal, bone, and flesh. Ethan barely had time to react before another wave of attacks came barreling toward him, forcing him to duck behind a large rock for cover. His heart raced in his chest as his mind struggled to keep up with the chaos around him. "Stay focused." Captain Wright's voice cut through the confusion, sharp and commanding. "Don't let it break our line." Ethan glanced over his shoulder, seeing the rest of the team in various positions, their rifles raised, firing sporadically at the creature. But the monster seemed impervious to the bullets. It was as if nothing could harm it. Every shot seemed to bounce off its thick, grotesque skin, and the more they fired, the more enraged it became. Mia was still at the center of their formation, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. The trauma from the creature's first appearance had taken a heavy toll on her. It was clear she was no longer in a state of panic-induced paralysis, but the mental toll was evident. Her movements were sluggish, as if she couldn't fully comprehend the danger around her. Her hands trembled as she clutched her gun, though she barely aimed it. "Ethan!" Captain Wright shouted from the far side of the clearing. She had moved into position to intercept the creature's next charge, but she was also keeping an eye on Mia, knowing they couldn't afford to lose her too. "Get her to safety, now. We can hold this thing off, but only for so long." Ethan didn't need any further instruction. He turned toward Mia, rushing to her side. His pulse hammered in his ears, but his focus remained on her. He could see that the terror had paralyzed her again, and though she held her rifle in her hands, it was as if she no longer saw the creature, the men around her, or the life-or-death struggle they were engaged in. All she could see was the monster. She had become its prey in her mind. "Mia!" Ethan called, grabbing her shoulders, trying to bring her back to reality. Her eyes were vacant, staring into the distance as if lost in some horrific memory or vision. "Mia, we need to move. You need to snap out of it. We're not going to make it if we don't get you out of here." Mia's eyes flickered for a moment, and she blinked rapidly, as though trying to focus. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Ethan gripped her tighter, his fingers digging into her shoulders. "Mia. You're not alone. We're getting out of here. Stay with me." Her eyes cleared, just for a moment, and she nodded slowly, though her hands still shook. Ethan could see the conflict in her eyes. She was no longer just a victim of fear. Something had shifted in her, something deeper than terror. It was as though the reality of what they were up against, the horrific creature they were trying to survive, had seeped into her very soul. It wasn't just a monster, it was a symbol of something much bigger, a force beyond their understanding. "We need to go now," Ethan urged again, his voice steady but laced with urgency. Mia didn't respond immediately, but after a moment, she seemed to come to herself. She dropped her rifle at her side, her trembling hands gripping the straps of her pack. She finally looked at him, her eyes clear now, but the terror hadn't entirely left. It would never truly leave, he knew. This was something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "Stay close," Ethan ordered, and she nodded again. As they began to move, Ethan kept one hand on her shoulder, guiding her through the chaos. The air was thick with the sound of gunfire, the roar of the creature, and the cries of soldiers battling for their lives. Every step they took felt like an eternity, but somehow, they were inching toward the edge of the clearing. The sound of the helicopter was still absent, and the growing realization that they might not make it out was weighing heavily on Ethan's chest. But he pushed the thought aside. He couldn't afford to think like that, not now. Behind them, Captain Wright and the rest of the team were still holding the line, retreating slowly but methodically as the creature continued to advance. Their strategy was clear: keep it distracted, keep it away from the civilians. But the creature's movements were so fast, so unpredictable, that it was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain any control. The beast's resilience and speed had caught them off guard. It was not a simple animal. It was a force of nature. The air seemed to crackle as the creature howled again, a sound so primal, so full of rage, that it sent chills down Ethan's spine. He turned briefly to glance over his shoulder and saw the monster charging at them again, its massive limbs propelling it forward at an alarming rate. "Mia, hurry," he urging her to move faster. But she seemed rooted in place for a moment, her eyes drifting back to the beast, fear once again flooding her features. "Come on, Mia," Ethan shouted, his heart racing. He didn't have time to be gentle anymore. He pulled her with all his strength, not caring if she stumbled, not caring if she resisted. They had to survive, and right now, survival meant getting away from the beast. Captain Wright's voice echoed across the clearing again. "Fall back to the extraction point. We'll cover you." But Ethan barely heard her. His world had narrowed down to Mia, to the creature, and to the pounding of his own heart. They were close, so close, yet the distance between them and safety seemed to stretch farther with every passing moment. With a surge of adrenaline, they reached the edge of the clearing, and Ethan could see the tree lean just beyond. He pushed Mia forward, but as they moved, the creature leapt into the air, its claws slicing through the air toward them. "No!" Ethan yelled as he saw the monster coming down directly above them, its body hurtling toward the ground with terrifying speed. In that moment, everything seemed to move in slow motion. Without thinking, Ethan shoved Mia aside, his body instinctively falling into a protective stance. He felt the wind from the creature's descent before he heard the ground crack under its weight. The impact sent Ethan tumbling to the ground, the force of the blow reverberating through his entire body. Mia screamed as she watched Ethan's body hit the dirt, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. The creature, momentarily dazed, pulled itself to its feet and turned its glowing eyes toward Mia. Ethan's breath was ragged, his head spinning from the impact, but he forced himself to look up just in time to see the creature's claws reaching for Mia. There was no time to think. He had to act. He had to stop it. With a burst of energy, he scrambled to his feet, grabbing his rifle. He fired, but the shots barely fazed the creature. It snarled, its focus solely on Mia now. But then, something changed. The ground beneath them seemed to shake with an approaching sound, engines, the sound of rotors cutting through the air. The helicopter. It was finally here. As the helicopter swooped into the clearing, the wind from the blades blasted through the trees, pushing the creature back momentarily. The beast recoiled, its balance thrown off by the gusts. The soldiers seized the opportunity, opening fire with everything they had, and this time, the creature staggered. "Mia, now!" Captain Wright screamed, and the soldiers quickly pulled her to safety, guiding her into the helicopter. Ethan made a final, desperate lunge toward the creature, firing his last shot. But it wasn't enough. As the helicopter's engines roared louder, the beast let out one final, earth-shattering roar, its primal fury filling the air before it retreated into the shadows of the jungle. The helicopter lifted off, and as Ethan looked out the window, his heart still pounding, he knew that what they had just faced was only the beginning. The island held secrets, dark, dangerous secrets, that would change everything. But for now, they had survived. And as the helicopter soared into the sky, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The island had given them a glimpse of something horrifying, something beyond their comprehension, and he knew deep down that the creature they had fought was only a small part of a much larger puzzle. The true story was just beginning. The days after their escape from the island were a blur of disorientation, disbelief, and confusion. Ethan had seen some terrible things in his time with the Coast Guard, but nothing could prepare him for the horror they had encountered on that remote island. The creature, the island itself, everything about it seemed like a nightmare come to life. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The island had left its mark on each of them, in ways they couldn't fully comprehend yet. The worst part? The feeling that the island was calling them back. Ethan sat in the Coast Guard base's debriefing room, his uniform still slightly stained from the island's muck and blood, his body aching from the ordeal. He hadn't spoken much since the extraction. He was processing everything that had happened, still trying to piece together the reality of it all. The creature had vanished into the jungle, but it hadn't been the only thing they had left behind. The island, the hidden threats, the unexplained phenomena, it all haunted him. Mia, too, had fallen silent. The trauma from that day weighed heavily on her. She had been one of the first to engage with the creature, firing in a desperate attempt to stop it. But what had happened after the helicopter arrived? The blur of the battle, the disorientation, and the fear, it had all seemed to blur together in her memory. She couldn't even recall the exact moment she was pulled into the helicopter. All she knew was that she had narrowly escaped death, and that knowledge had left her feeling like a ghost in her own life. As they sat in the room, waiting for the final debriefing, the door opened, and Captain Wright stepped in. She looked tired, older, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her presence was a reminder of their mission's gravity. Wright had been their leader throughout the entire ordeal, but even she had her own demons to contend with now. There was a look in her eyes that Ethan couldn't quite place, something hidden beneath her professional exterior. "Ethan, Mia," Captain Wright said quietly, her voice unusually soft. "I know you both have a lot to process. We all do. What you encountered on that island, it's not something you can just walk away from." She took a deep breath, clearly struggling to find the right words. "But it's not over. The creature, the island, it's not the only problem." Mia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze fixed on her hands. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. They all knew something bigger was looming, something beyond the creature. They had been sent to the island on a routine mission, but what they had discovered was far from ordinary. "Something still out there," Wright continued, her voice steadying as she addressed them both directly. "We don't know the full extent of it yet, but that creature, whatever it is, was part of a much larger operation. The island, the government's involvement, it's not what we were told. And now, the ramifications are starting to unfold." Ethan's brow furrowed as he exchanged a look with Mia. The mission had been a response to a routine distress signal, a distress call from a research team that had gone dark after encountering strange activity on the island. But what had they uncovered? A creature straight out of a nightmare? And a government cover-up of what? Captain Wright sat down across from them, her expression grave. "We're getting reports of strange phenomena popping up near the island, sightings, unexplained disappearances, and, of course, rumors of other creatures just like the one we saw. The government is trying to suppress everything, but this is bigger than any of us. And the truth is," she paused, staring at the table before her, as if collecting her thoughts. "The creature we encountered is only a small part of something much darker." Ethan's pulse quickened, the unease creeping back into his chest. "What do you mean? What else is out there?" Wright hesitated for a moment before responding, her eyes narrowing. "It's not just a creature. There are other experiments taking place. Some of them might still be on the island, and others might have escaped. The creature was just one piece of a larger puzzle." Ethan felt his stomach twist. It made sense in a way, but it also terrified him more than he could admit. Experiments? Was that what they were dealing with? He thought back to the creature, the way it had attacked, the way it had been almost invincible to their weapons. It wasn't natural. But this? This was a different kind of horror. One that they hadn't prepared for. Why wasn't this shared with us? Mia's voice was quiet but edged with a hard note. She was still recovering from the ordeal, but there was a strength beneath the surface. "We were sent in without any knowledge of what we'd be facing. Why hide it from us?" Wright's eyes flickered, her expression tightening. "Because the people in charge didn't know the full extent either. They were as blindsided as you were. Or at least, that's what they say." Ethan's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information. The creature, the strange activity, the sudden increase in reports from the island, it was all pointing to something much bigger than they had initially thought. But what was the government hiding? What had they really unleashed? "Do you think this is over?" Mia asked suddenly, her voice heavy with a mix of dread and defiance. She glanced up, her eyes locked on Wright. "Do you think we've seen the last of whatever that thing is? Whatever's on that island?" Wright met her gaze, her lips pressed into a thin line. "No. I don't think we have. And neither do you." The words hung in the air, thick with the implication of something far more sinister waiting to be uncovered. Ethan shifted in his seat, his hands gripping the edge of the table as the realization settled over him. They were far from finished. The island, its creature, its experiments, its secrets, would haunt them until the truth came out. And what was worse, they had only begun to scrape the surface. As Wright continued to speak, detailing the government's attempts to suppress the information, Ethan felt the weight of the situation press in on him. He had always known that there were things in the world that couldn't be explained, but this? This was something else entirely. And the thought of returning to that island, of facing whatever else might still be there, was almost too much to bear. But he knew, deep down, that it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The island had its grip on them, and there was no turning back now. The truth was far more complicated than they had ever realized, and the creature they had fought was just the tip of the iceberg. Wright's voice broke through his thoughts again, and she leaned forward slightly. "Ethan, Mia, there are things happening on that island that no one understands. We're going to need your help. Not just for the recovery effort, but for something much bigger. You're not the same people you were when you first went in. You've seen things, experienced things, that most can't even imagine. And that makes you the key to everything we need to do next." The weight of her words sank in. Ethan glanced at Mia, who was now looking at him with a mixture of determination and fear. They both knew what this meant. They had already survived the impossible. But now, they were being called to return, to face even greater challenges. As Captain Wright outlined the next steps, the preparations for another mission, the stakes seemed even higher than before. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the gravity of the situation took root. They had no choice but to confront what lay ahead, whatever it might be. The creature was just the beginning, and the island's secrets were only beginning to surface. The silence that followed Wright's final words was deafening. Ethan's mind was racing, but there was no escaping the reality that the island would never let them go. It had changed them in ways they couldn't yet understand, and whatever they had left behind, it was waiting for them to return. As he stood up, the weight of the decision pressing down on him, Ethan didn't look back at Mia. He didn't have to. He knew she would be ready. They had already faced the unimaginable. And now, together, they would face whatever came next. The island had called them back, and they were going to answer. But this time, they would be prepared. Because survival was just the beginning. And the truth? It was something far darker than either of them could have ever anticipated.